2022. It is January 2022. Coronavirus interventions, from lockdowns to vaccine mandates, have been accompanied by serious unintended harms. Children have been denied education. Adults have been stopped from working. Vulnerable people have been denied care and even human contact. Cost-benefit analyses make it clear that the cure has been worse than the disease. Life saved has been more than offset by the life ended by the interventions. This journal reviewed a number of different cost-benefit analyses and concluded, lockdowns are not just an inefficient policy, they must rank as one of the greatest peacetime policy disasters of all time. Mostly such analyses have been ignored, and people believe that governments, for all their flaws, have been doing their best to fight a virus. But have they really been fighting a virus? Two key issues concerning the economy and our money deserve our attention. We are now at a turning point in our history, a transition that is like the end of a game of Monopoly. In Monopoly, you go round and round the board, gaining assets and making money until one player owns everything and the game ends. In the real world, we can now identify some winners. Here are the most valuable companies in the world, with Apple at the top. Let's look at who owns them. Three of Apple's biggest stakeholders are companies named Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. Microsoft is owned by the same three, Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. Oh, Google is the same. So is Amazon. Let's look at some vaccine companies. Pfizer is owned by the same big three. So is Moderna. And so is Johnson & Johnson. What a coincidence. A vast proportion of the world's capital is now concentrated in the big three. So who owns them? Well, State Street is owned by Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. For BlackRock, it is the same. Vanguard is at the top of this pyramid, but as a private company, they don't specifically declare who its owners are. Why aren't the media more interested in this? Who owns the media? Here is a list of US media ranked by audience size by Harvard University. Number one, with the biggest readership of all, is Wikipedia, whose biggest funder is Google, who is owned, as we've seen, by the big three. Number two is Fox News, which is owned by the big three. Number three, CNN, is part of AT&T, which is owned by the big three. What about newspapers? The New York Times. Oh, only two of the big three. And News Corporation's London Times. Surprise, surprise. All three are back again. Can media outlets owned by those who make billions out of various products be trusted to report objectively on those products? What about vaccines? But perhaps most significant of all in this great game of Monopoly, it is now ending. Vanguard has won. At the end of the game, things change. The winner has all the money and all the power. But once the game is over, the old rules no longer apply, and we can put the money away. It no longer has any use. As the players move on to the next activity, the winner risks losing the power they had during the previous game. Anyone for tennis? If the winner wants to stay in power, they might try to set new rules for the losers. They might say that we need to have a great reset. The World Economic Forum is the group of world leaders and billionaires that usually meet each year in Davos in Switzerland. The World Economic Forum has argued for a great reset. Last year they made a video where they shared their vision for the future. 8 predictions for the world in 2030. Their first prediction, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Could this be one of the new rules for the losers? This crucial turning point in our economic history happens to coincide with the end of money, at least as we know it. Personal money is simple. If you have $10 and you spend $3, you have 7 left. For governments, things are different. If a government is short of money, it can create more by borrowing it, with no need to pay it back. As a result, national debts are soaring. A government might have $10, spend $3, and be left with $25. Governments can also allow banks to lend money they don't have, flooding the economy with even more money. Here, for example, is the US money supply. Look what happened in 2020. In 2021, money supply was still shooting upwards. It was not always this way. In 1944, as the Second World War was ending, the victors agreed the Bretton Woods system.
Representatives of 28 countries, with Lord Halifax signing for the United Kingdom.
From 1946, the value of the dollar was fixed at $35 per ounce of gold, and other currencies were tied to gold via fixed dollar exchange rates. For decades, the gold standard anchored the global monetary system. But by 1971, the USA was under pressure. The Vietnam War was proving expensive, as were various domestic spending programs. One weekend, it all changed.
To defend the dollar against the speculators, I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
President Nixon suddenly announced that the USA would no longer exchange dollars for gold at a fixed rate. This became known as the Nixon shock. The gold standard was finished. Countries everywhere could now create all the money they wanted. Here is a picture of US interest rates. After the break from the gold standard, we see 40 years of decline. Think of interest rates as the rent you have to pay to borrow an asset. As the rent declines to nearly zero, it suggests that the asset, in this case the dollar, is worth very little. It may be even worse than it seems. This view compares mortgage rates in red to consumer prices in blue. Again, we see 40 years of very steady decline following the break from the gold standard. The interest rate was always higher than inflation. There's no point in lending if it will earn less than inflation. But see what happened in 2021. Inflation suddenly jumped up above the mortgage rate. Real interest rates are now negative. The return on a deposit will be less than the cost of inflation. There is now no point in saving in dollars if you have an alternative. But the problem is not limited to the USA. Here are the world's largest economies with inflation subtracted from interest rates to give you the real interest rate. For Western democracies, it is the same everywhere. Real interest rates have turned negative. The economist John Maynard Keynes could foresee at least some of the trouble that lay ahead for the Western world. He said, "A little reflection will show what enormous social changes would result from a gradual disappearance of a rate of return on accumulated wealth. When your money loses its value, it's hard to pay for the things you need. One solution is to create more money." The Biden administration's Build Back Better Act planned $3.5 trillion of spending, a desperate measure to keep the economy liquid a little longer as the value drains away from the currency. Here is a chart of US national debt, also soaring upwards, especially at the start of 2020. These are debts that are never meant to be repaid. Does anyone really believe that this system can go on forever? What happens when it finally breaks? How will the powerful ensure that they keep their wealth, despite the breakdown of our money? In summary, the true value of the old money is collapsing. It is the end of money, at least as we know it. From a monetary point of view, there has to be a great reset. But will this reset suit the needs of ordinary people, or will it serve the interests of the power elites? This is also the end of the game. The great game of Monopoly is ending, and the winners want to set new rules in a great reset so they can preserve their wealth and power as we transition to a new era where the controls of the market economy are replaced by the apps and the algos they control. One theory is that a virus needs a vaccine, which requires a passport or digital ID, which enables a digital currency, which enables socially engineered controls, which can replace the free market capitalism that has regulated our lives in the West for centuries. Could this really all have been so deliberate? It is more than interesting that the British Parliament was recently told that the COVID virus was probably engineered and released from a lab. It ought to be a dynamite revelation that triggers front-page headlines and the highest priority investigations. Somebody has engineered and then released a virus that has caused a genocide of millions of deaths. At least that's what we've been told. It should be dynamite, but it isn't. In reality, the system doesn't care. It knows. This map looks like an indication of where the coronavirus has hit hardest. The Americas, Europe, South Africa. But no, actually, this map shows for how long the country has been a democracy. No free market economy, no coronavirus necessary. The Western democracies have turned themselves upside down, not because of a virus that is hardly more dangerous than the flu, but because we are experiencing a slow-motion collapse of the economic system that we have grown up with. The pandemic is a means to control people and to facilitate a great reset that will preserve the advantages of the rich and powerful.